Okay. We're good to go. All right. Hello, everybody. How's everyone doing today, this Monday? Hope everyone's having a good week. Hope everyone had a good weekend. And let's get rolling with another live. We have in Moscow, host of RT's Crosstalk from the Autonomous Republic of Russia, Mr. Peter Lavelle. How you doing, Peter?
All right. Actually, we're later today, I'll be doing a program on Chaz. And in my introduction, this is a sneak preview for everyone. I end my introduction with this. A tip to all, come visit Chaz before Chaz visits you. Okay?
That's quite apt. That's true. Chaz is going global. But let's see. All right. Yes. You guys can hear me? You guys can see me? Yes. All right. Great. We have in London from the Autonomous Republic of London. Can we call it that, Alexander?
No, I think, we're still the United Kingdom. I think that it would take a lot before we see a Chaz here, actually. I think that we must assume that things in the United States are going a particular direction. I think Britain isn't quite there yet anyway. But, we're here in Britain in a hot, sunny day, and we're watching events in the United States closely. And obviously they do have traction here too.
Well, let's get rolling.
Very quiet in Russia, which is good. Okay, yeah. Russia has had too much of a tumultuous history. Absolutely. We like it nice and quiet.
Yeah,
that is true. All right, hello, Spartan Warrior Queen. Thank you very much for moderating. It's good to have you here. Good to have everybody here who's joining us wherever you are in the world. UK, US, Australia, New Zealand, somewhere in Europe, Africa, India, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us for another live. Let's get right into it, guys, and see if we can keep this live to about an hour, hour and a half. Let's see how well we do here. But going back onto the visiting the UK again, Alexander, the title of this live stream is Erasing Churchill. Google had erased Churchill for about a 24-hour period when you did a search for Winston Churchill, or you did World War II heroes or something like that, or World War II leaders, whatever you put in there. They had all the photos of all the people that were involved in World War II, from all the presidents, the heroes, to the villains, from Hitler to Stalin to FDR, you name it. They had everybody. But for some reason, Winston Churchill had a little question mark on his photo. So he was missing. Since then, Google has issued a statement saying that they looked into it and they kind of found his photo, and now he's back. So if you do the searches, Mr. Churchill will be back. But it's really interesting to have seen that within a 2 week period, we've seen statues destroyed. We've seen statues vandalized. We've seen statues thrown into rivers. This is not only a US phenomenon, it has made its way to the UK.
Yes.
We've seen the Churchill statue not only vandalized, but placed in a box.
Yes.
It's been placed in a box so that no one can see it. And over the past 3-4 years, we've been prepped for deplatforming on a digital level. So, I mean, they've been conditioning us to make us disappear for our thoughts, for our words, for our opinions. And now it seems that they're just making the physical disappear as well. The goal here is to get to the year 0, a full restart. Let's cut off Christopher Columbus's head and just erase everything that happened in the past and start over with this new utopia. The first place we're seeing it is in Chaz, the Autonomous Republic of Chaz, Antifa-stan, Somalia, whatever people are calling it in Seattle. And we'll talk about Chaz. We'll talk right now about the UK and what's going on there. There were protests, Alexander, too, over the weekend, which actually pitted, I believe, people that were looking to protect the statue. I don't know if that's correct. People looking to protect the statue, and BLM and Antifa and police, kind of a gangs of New York, maybe kind of scenario going on in London. I don't think it got that violent or that large.
No.
But this is occurring. It's interesting to see this in London. And one final thought is that this nefarious organization that, let's call it George Soros, because I can't think of another name, even though I'm not saying it's about one guy. I'm saying it's this organization, this network of NGOs it seems to me that they're definitely international. And they're definitely not outsourcing their regime change anymore. I think in the Maidan, you could say they outsourced it, whether they outsourced it to the people, whether they brought in people from other countries to stir up trouble, whether they paid snipers from Georgia to take shots at the crowd. Now it seems like the Soros machine is actually employing foot soldiers. In other words, they're investing heavily in Antifa, they're investing heavily in Black Lives Matter, and these guys are the soldiers now that are going to cause havoc and terror on an international level. So, Alexander, Churchill disappearing, being erased. What do you think of that?
Well, I think we need to take a step back, because I'm pretty sure that we will see Churchill's statue still remain in Parliament Square, at least for the time being. And I think the decision by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, to put a box around him, I think that's actually gone down badly. Now, we've had the first opinion polls about this, and I'm reading one at the moment which says that 59% of people, Britons, agree with the aims of Black Lives Matter. Not quite sure what they mean by that. 59% think they shouldn't demonstrate in the middle of a pandemic. 41% think statues of slave traders should be brought down. Only a tiny number want them destroyed. Nearly half would put them in a museum. 2/3 said Churchill's views can't be judged by today's standards, and the overwhelming majority want his statue to stay in the square. So I think when you're faced with that level of opinion in Britain, I don't think there's any real risk, actually, that Churchill will come down. And I think those scenes that we saw over the weekend can be overstated. My impression is, and it's been confirmed to me, that there were never more than a few hundred people on either side protesting in London over the weekend. So I think that the British population has looked at this and is saying this is going too far, and there is already the signs of them pulling back. Certainly the impression I'm getting, and I'm also to some extent connected to the academic world, with which I have many connections, is that last week the mood in some of the universities was boiling, and there were a lot of seething protests, but that's also started to come down, with a lot of people again looking at these scenes and saying to themselves, do we really want to go there? So I think that this is ebbing in Britain, but consider how far it's gone. I mean, it's an extraordinary sort of fire that has spread across Britain, and it's originated in the United States. And in the United States, which remains very much the epicenter of this thing, I think that there, if anything, it's gaining power. It's getting stronger. And in the United States, it does seem to me that the United States, there is a particular agenda to change history, if you like, to erase history. Google is an American company. And the fact that he took this extraordinary step for 24 hours of making Churchill invisible is remarkable. I mean, I think that is one of the most astonishing things I've ever heard of. I mean, would they have done the same to Lenin? Would they have done the same to Stalin? I mean, but Churchill, I mean, who was, the United States' ally during the Second World War, who was a leader of the anti-Hitler coalition, who was the person who led Britain in the war against, the most powerful racist government that there has ever existed in world history. I mean, it is astonishing to me that Google would make a step like that. And it's astonishing also that it's able to do it with apparently so little comment or criticism about it in the United States.
Well, it says more about Google than really about objective understanding of history. I mean, the fact that Google flip-flopped in 24 hours. I mean, are these serious people? I mean, I think the interesting thing is that, to glean some conclusions from the polls that we were just presented. What concerns me is that the Overton window has been expanded. I mean, that's the whole point.
Yes.
Okay? I mean, we can look at one specific moment in time when those polls were taken, but the fact is the Overton window has been expanded, and that means it has traction here. I mean, I'm a trained historian. We put up statues to celebrate ourselves, to remember critical points in history. But does it mean that we venerate every one of these people? No, we don't, and we shouldn't. Churchill has a very sketchy past in a way. I mean, his attitudes towards ethnic minorities, non-white people around the world is pretty atrocious. Does that mean we erase him from history? No, the point is here is, and this is my whole deal. Let me give you a quick example. I was in Beijing a couple summers ago. I was at a BRICS media conference, and I met the delegation from South Africa. And they were real traditional communists from what I could tell. I mean, they were like Maoists, okay? And at that time, that's when I guess we can call the first wave of attacking statues in the US was occurring. And they were asking me about it. And I said, I have a great deal of trepidation about it. First of all, it should be a local matter. Communities should decide this. I don't think there should be overarching laws, particularly in the United States. And I said, well, what do they, I mean, there are statues to apartheid figures in South Africa, correct? And she said, yes. And I said, should they all be torn down? And she said, yes. And I said, so the next generation will never know what the physical evidence of what apartheid was. I mean, history is something we don't venerate. It's something that we learn from, okay? And the Germans actually have done a pretty good job about dealing with that issue. They have two types of statues. A statue that you learn from a painful experience, and a statue that commemorates some kind of turning point or achievement / pivot, okay? But I mean, they've been able to kind of balance it out, okay? Remembering soldiers from the First World War. I mean, should they be taken down? I mean, I don't know. The Germans should decide that, and the community should decide it. But the problem here is going back to what Alexander and Christopher are saying, going back to year zero, it's been tried many times before, and it always ends in tragedy, always. See, dismissing history, wiping it, is denying it. And if you deny history, you have no guide to go to deal with the present and the future. And living only in the present you're lost. You don't have any kind of compass whatsoever. And that's very, very dangerous.
Yes.
I really want to make it clear to everyone, Confederate statues, well, they were put up by Democrats, okay? The Ku Klux Klan came from the Democratic Party. I mean, if you want to really start wiping everything clean, you better think twice. Alexander McKeers, how many members of the House of Lords have, how many of them have ancestors that were involved in the slave trade or the Opium Wars? I mean, how many of them? Look at Franklin D. Roosevelt, a venerated American president for many. His family made money off of the opiate trade in China. Well, I mean, not his father, but his grandfather. I mean, there's a whole lineage there. And there's a whole lineage of people in the UK and in the United States and other countries that made fortunes off of that kind of trade, which we would find abhorrent today. What do? Do we take Franklin Delano Roosevelt statue down? I mean, the problem is here, it's a mistake to look for virtue in people, okay? What we need to do is we need to focus on people that give us a learning experience, okay? And have them as a witness from the past to help inform us today and tell us what not to do, not what to do.
Indeed. Can I just say about that? I mean, we have the thread of the slave trade, of the empire running through British society today to an extraordinary degree. I mean, we have, of course, many people in the British political class, including people who are supporting or saying they're supporting some of these actions, whose background, or rather whose family backgrounds, trace very, very much back to the world of the empire. We also have companies like Tate and Lyle, HSBC, for example, which are entirely imperial creations. This is very much part of the structure of modern Britain. But of course, the point is, do you examine them? Do you look at these people and these companies by according to what they do now, or do you measure them by what their ancestors may have done 200 years ago? It seems to me what you need to do is to look at what they do now. And there was a fascinating article, by the way, by an Albanian academic, which appeared in The Guardian over the weekend, which was very critical about the whole business of taking down statues. And he was talking about, taking down statues in Albania, and said, that this happened there, and it seemed to many people like a moment of liberation. But what it actually did, as he put it, was that it meant that all of those people who were implicated in what had happened before said to themselves, well, now, all that past is erased. So what we do now, we start from a completely clean slate. And the result is huge corruption, declining life expectancy, falling literacy, and all sorts of things going wrong in Albania, because of course, the past was in a sense erased. It's a very, very interesting article, and it made a big impression on me, and I know it has on a lot of people here. So this is what we need to look at. We need to look at what people are doing today, and what the British state is doing today in many places is very bad. Many of these people who are now advocating all of these actions that we've been talking about, pulling down statues, whatever, are the same people who want to intervene in places like Libya, in Syria, in all of those things, do all these awful wars all around the world. If you want proof of that, go to The Guardian, which is one of the most militantly, pro-regime change, pro-humanitarian intervention, as it is so miscalled, newspapers in Britain. And they are also the people who are most fervently in support of toppling statues, rewriting history, doing all of those things. Erasing the empire of the past gives license and a kind of moral power to the imperialists of today. And I think this is something people need to understand about this phenomenon, because to some extent, I think that's also what it's about. Mm-hmm.
Well, what is really terrifying to ponder is that up until the middle of the 19th century, slavery was still very common in the world. And slavery the history of slavery is as long as human history.
Yes.
And then for some reason, well, and for good reasons, at the beginning of the 19th century and by the end of the 19th century, slavery as a worldwide phenomenon had largely come to an end. There's still pockets of it today, like Hillary Clinton. The slave trade exists in Libya today. But the historical mistake or oversight, omission, is that it was white people that ended worldwide slavery. Okay, and the British took the leading role as the world abolitionist. All right, and so this is something that is completely missed, and it should. We need to keep pointing out to people. I mean, does that make all white people virtuous? Of course not. Okay, but it took people of courage and religious faith, I would like to point out.
Absolutely, that's a very important point.
Hard to end that odious institution.
Yes.
And so tarring all white people as slavers is ridiculous.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Absolutely ridiculous. Actually, I commend the people of Great Britain during the 18th and 19th century for leading that, okay? Because it was obviously the right thing to do. I mean, you can keep doing the parallels. I mean, you're both Greek, we get a lot of ideas about civil society and ideas of the domos and representation. But the Greeks had slaves too. So I guess the whole idea about democracy is tainted now because they were slave owners, okay? Or look at the Confederate South. What percentage of white Southerners were slave owners? I think it's less than 10%.
Yes.
So you condemn all people in the Confederacy for slavery? If you look at the writings, the letters, the diaries, the memoirs of people that were connected with the Confederate cause, it was because it was a war about states' rights. And of course, slavery is part of that states' right, having the right to have slavery. I'm not dismissing the importance of slavery. But the Civil War, if you look at the people, the combatants, were the Northern soldiers fighting in the South to end slavery? No, because the North was attacked by a secessionist South. They started the war, okay? Fort Sumter, it was the name of the fort, okay? And the Southerners were fighting the North because the North was in the South, okay? I don't want to diminish the importance of slavery in this conflict, but it was a war about how people should live and living up to the Constitution itself. Unfortunately, it didn't go far enough when we had another 100 years of Jim Crow, okay, that was cultivated by the Democratic Party for a century. So let's get the history straight, okay? I mean, I think it was in the United States, there was an abolitionist statue. I don't remember, I think Baldwin. I mean, they defaced it. They didn't even know he was an abolitionist. I mean, the people that think they know what history should mean don't even know the history.
Yes. Yes. Can I just say a lot of points there, Peter, but can I just stress about Britain, the anti-slavery movement in Britain, which gained enormous strength in the 18th century, was a mass movement led mainly by people of Christian people who were driven to do it because of their Christian faith, and which always acted throughout in a legal and peaceful way. It acted through the courts, it petitioned Parliament, it sought to win over British public opinion and British elite opinion, and it abolished slavery through the laws. It did not set itself up as a revolutionary movement, and it didn't topple any statues. I mean, this is an important point to say. I mean,
I remember
that.
I remember very clearly that many of the abolitionists, they would have drawings of the slave ships and sometimes intentionally in the ports have regular liners go past these, and you could smell the stench and you could see the misery. And it was a very powerful shaming campaign as well, to show it, the real face of what it looks like, okay? Because what was the film? Was it Django? What was it called? The
Django Unchained.
Yeah,
Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, Tarantino. I mean, I'm kind of ambivalent about that film because it's kind of cartoonish. But one thing it did show is it showed, I think, probably the most realistic depiction of what slavery looked like in the South, the American South, that Hollywood has ever presented, because it was odious, it was disgusting. And I think it was really important to show the public that. I mean, you get the sense, in the American 20th century, that it was kind of like Hogan's Heroes, okay? It wasn't. It was a disgusting, odious institution. Yeah. And the more you learn about the real history, the more you can understand about the people that fought for emancipation and abolition, and have an appreciation for today, okay? I mean, the narrative is that racism is rampant everywhere, and depending on your degree of victimization, it diminishes your culpability. That is just ridiculous. I mean, that is social engineering. That is just nonsense. I mean, what about people that immigrated from the Bahamas to the United States? Do they have to take on the entire legacy of American Blacks? Or how about somebody from Somalia? Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yes.
It's really ridiculous.
Yes. I mean, coming back to the anti-slavery movement, of course, many of the people like Wilberforce who led it were high Tories. So, I mean, there's also that element in it. I mean, it was a religious movement. It encompassed people of many different views, both on the British left, which already existed at that time, and on the right. And it was, as I said, it was led by Christians, and it was peaceful. And it did establish, by the way, also a legacy within Britain, a foundation for anti-imperialism, which was a much more powerful force in 19th century Britain than people are aware of, and at many, many different levels. The British public supported the North during the Civil War. Members of the British elite supported the South.
That's right.
But the British public, the people in the working class communities in Lancashire, those sort of people strongly supported the North because they identified with the struggle for liberation and for the democracy that they saw that the United States stood for. So these are complex phenomena, and just wiping it out, going for a year zero type solution, is to completely not just distort the process. It is to create a completely different history, a false history, on top of the actual history of what really happened.
And also here, I just a caveat here, I want to make sure everybody understands. The British establishment did support the Confederacy during the Civil War, but not because of slavery, okay? Mm-hmm. Because they saw the United States coming up, would supersede them in trade and military prowess, okay? So it was not over slavery, it was, it was a Thucydides trap, okay?
Yes.
How to deal with a rising power, a challenging power. So I want to be very clear about that.
Yes. Peter, you mentioned the Tarantino film, The Django Unchained, and I was thinking about a couple of days ago that HBO took out Gone with the Wind, right? They're going to put it back again, they said, but they're going to sanitize it. But I was thinking, where does this end? Can we not agree that statues are artwork? Good or bad, it doesn't matter. Someone sat there and created these statues. There was some artist involved that created these statues. And you can then say, okay, so we're going to take down the statues. We're going to throw them in rivers. We're going to put them in a box somewhere. We're going to hide them. So you are taking something that has a cultural or artistic significance, and you're taking it out of the public eye. Now you're removing films because people can't handle those films. I wonder if Tarantino could have gotten away with Django Unchained today. I really wonder if he could have. I doubt it. But are we going to start scrubbing all the movies throughout all the archive of cinema and start saying, well, let's take this one down. Let's sanitize this one. Let's edit out these scenes, because today's citizens, they're just not emotionally equipped to handle these types. They just can't handle it. And then Peter, Peter, your thoughts, we have to go through the Hermitage. Do we have to go to the Louvre? Do we have to go, to the Hermitage where I was there and go through all the paintings, the beautiful paintings of, say, Rembrandt, a master like Rembrandt, who painted these amazing, religious types of paintings, and say, we have to get rid of these because Christianity offends me. So take all of these down as well. Where does this thing end?
The thing is, it's like Gone with the Wind. Okay, let's take that as an example here. That is an amazing film. Cinematographically, it's an amazing film, and it's remembered for a good reason. And it is a depiction of antebellum South after the Civil War, okay? It is a historical rendition, okay? And the thing is that what we can learn from it now is how it was made in the
1930s.
1930s. So, I mean, for me, as someone that was trained as a historian, for me, it's a very interesting cultural artifact of how a 1930s Hollywood film understood antebellum South. I mean, and that's very interesting. Does it make it right? Does it make it morally right? No, objectively, it is a perspective about how the country stood at that time. I'd like to just point out real quickly, I remember when I was a graduate student, I came across some very interesting footage. It was 50 years after the Civil War that American historians, North and South, came to a basic consensus. It took about 50 years, a basic consensus to understand what the war meant, okay? Because it was really important for the American public to have a consensus of what that conflict meant so they could move forward. It was very important. And the footage that I saw that was so interesting, I don't remember which battlefield it was, but it was on, I think it was in Virginia, and it had soldiers dressed in blue and gray, and they were sitting at the same table, and they were talking about the history of the great battles. There was no great animus then. There was no hatred then. And they all talked about how to heal the country. And that is so inspiring when you see it. Now what you see is find every single artifact you can find to divide us even more.
Yes.
And that I think that's intentional. Okay.
Yes.
As Alexander Christopher pointed it out, this is all about the very foundations of our society and culture, and obviously a good part of Western culture has its foundations in Christianity. And this is another form of secularization. And they want to replace it with this liturgy of wokeism. They are creating a cult. This is a cult. They have a liturgy, they have the priesthood, they have the laity, they have scripture, they have ritual. It's all there. They're building a cult to finally take away the Christian foundations of Western society and the spin-offs that we get on like St. Thomas Aquinas about ideas about how about a government and the role of individuals in society. I mean, some of these Christian thinkers were really quite brilliant and really stay with us to this day, even if you're not even aware of it.
Absolutely. And of course, the other thing that's happening is it's having a major effect, especially in the United States, much more, I think, in the United States than in other places, but also to some extent in other places, on the academic world. And one of the things which I am becoming increasingly concerned about, and I think everybody should be, is that universities, which have historically always been in the Western tradition, a place for free debate. This is even true in medieval Europe, by the way. A person like Abelard, I mean, I don't know how familiar people are with Abelard, but he was a French medieval academic with all kinds of heterodox ideas, but he was able to function within the academic world because that was understood that, you know, there were places for freedom. That is being taken down. We are now seeing...
And the church supported it.
And the church supported it,
because
exactly.
they said, if you want to have this kind of thought, they didn't want it directly inside of the church, but they would support it, what we call today universities. It was the Western churches that supported the establishment of the very first university.
Absolutely. It is. I remember reading somewhere, you know, the closing of the mind, of the Western mind. And that, it seems to me, is what is happening.
Bloom. The author was Bloom, yes.
Bloom, okay. And this is exactly what it seems to me is now happening in the academic world, because one of the most, for me, distressing, very upsetting things that I've seen are these anonymous letters and articles from academics, including one Black American academic, writing these things that I completely disagree with what's happening. I think that all of this is completely wrong, but I dare not identify myself, because if I do, I will be out of a job. And in other words, I feel threatened within my own institution, and to the point where I cannot speak out. And some of the, this thought control that's happening within these universities is backed by violence. I mean, I don't know whether people are familiar with what happened some years ago in Evergreen College, which is a Western college. I mean, it was, which basically, I mean, the student, a part, not all, we mustn't speak about all the students, but a part of the student community basically got completely out of control and used extraordinary violence in order to oust one of the academics. And the university administration basically capitulated. It dared not face these people down. And that, it seems to me, is a terrifying thing. And as I said, if it's so important, you know, entrenched, this attitude, this mindset becomes so entrenched in universities, then that will eventually freeze up intellectual life generally. Lots of things are said in universities which I completely disagree with. Was it not Voltaire? Well, it wasn't Voltaire, actually. It was somebody else who attributed to Voltaire, who said, I may disagree with what you say, but I will fight to the death for the right you have to say it. That's always been the Western liberal, the true liberal tradition, and that is being destroyed in the world, in the name, supposedly, of liberalism. Very bizarre, and it shows how completely distorted and upside down our world has become, and the totalitarian turn it is taking.
Yes, but the thing is that, you know, demolishing these statues, banning films that are part of our culture. If you think of Gone with the Wind, I mean, that's one, up until a couple days ago, it was considered one of the greatest films ever made by Hollywood, not because of its politics, but because of its form. But, you know, I just don't see all of this juvenile behavior ending what they claim to want to end systemic racism. How does it change that?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't change anything at all. As a matter of fact, it's just one huge breath of virtue signaling from white liberals. Okay, and you know what? I mean, for me, and I've made a number of programs about this. It doesn't. This kind of virtue signaling en masse doesn't address the structural deficiencies that we're experiencing right now, and with the pandemic exposed. Okay, I mean, instead of throwing a statue in the river, how are you going to, you know, half of Black men in America, or half of all Blacks, are unemployed right now. How are you going to address that issue?
Well, indeed.
I think that's much more pressing
than
defacing a statue that you have no knowledge of whatsoever, and then you just go home and you feel great about yourself. What did it change? Except for intimidate people and take the knee and genuflect. That doesn't change the structure of society and its ailments.
No, it doesn't. Say, on the contrary, it's going to reinforce them. I mean, I think this is part of the plan, because, as I say, we're not dealing with underlying structural problems. We're not dealing with the cabal of oligarchs that have emerged in the United States, who are quietly supporting this movement. This is the point that Alex was making.
Bottom line.
It doesn't affect them at all. I mean, they like it. They want it to be this way because, as I said, it means that the discussion is diverted away from what they're up to, what people like, Gates, Bezos, Soros, you name them, what they're all about, diverts the discussion away from them and talks about instead what Churchill or Jefferson Davis or whatever other person were doing 200 years ago. So it's ultimately it's not a conservative movement. It's a very militant, revolutionary, but in some ways reactionary one.
Absolutely. The thing is, what's really kind of fascinating, if we look at other. We look at the French Revolution, and we look at the Paris Commune, and then you have the Spring of Nations, 1848, and then we have the Bolshevik Revolution. What's the only thing that they have in common is that this is a really politics / ideology of motion. That's what it is. It's really quite vacuous intellectually. Okay, I mean, but it's the expression of it that appears to be revolutionary, but actually it's intensely reactionary. All right, and that's what makes it really kind of bizarre. And the other thing is that it doesn't. What it does is that it creates really a war on the middle class and on working people. I mean, I really wish they'd worry about those people more. And you know why? Because it covers the entire spectrum of all races. Okay, I mean, poverty, it doesn't discriminate. There's every person of every kind in poverty right now. And with coming out of this pandemic, it's more and more obvious. I'm not surprised that this virtue signaling mass hysteria is being amped up, because the US economy is in pretty deep trouble right now, okay? And there's no real leadership to address it. And I'm really disappointed with a lot of conservatives. Keep this in mind. A lot of conservatives, like myself, these are snowflakes. And of course, I've used that in a joking way. I don't deny it, okay? because I'm mocking it, okay? But these people are very, very serious. They come from the elite institutions of the United States, and they are borrowing themselves into the system, all right? So, I mean, you might think, I don't really care about it, but you know what? It really cares about you. And so we have to be vigilant.
We're living in a world that's not real, guys. We're going to be condemned to watching superhero movies. That's it. That's all we're going to be able to watch are Marvel and DC films, because that's all anyone is going to be able to stomach. That's the only thing that's going to get by the SJWs and
Alex,
the identity politics police.
It was a very good example a few years ago. I mean, there was that great film about Lincoln, a serious film about Lincoln. It was about 4 or 5 years ago now.
That's right,
It was really quite good. I really liked it.
Daniel Day-Lewis played him very remarkably well.
And it showed Lincoln. It depicted him the way he was at the time. And so his attitude towards Black people, in principle, he was against slavery, and he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And that's the whole film is about it. But did he have really sympathy with Black people? Not particularly at all. I mean, it was a very kind of a sober look, because the idea of slavery came from his religious upbringing, his faith, and his understanding of what the true creed of the Constitution was about. We deem, all men are created equal, okay? I mean, that nagged at him because obviously the reality wasn't that at the time. And the film shows how he struggled with it. And it was a struggle, okay? And I really like that depiction. But also around the same time, another Lincoln came out. And you know what it was? He was a vampire slayer. That's really, remember that? And that was
that's all people are going to be able to stomach are films like this, or they're only going to be able to play video games in order to have any type of emotional connection with other people's. I mean, we're stuck in this digital trap right now. Everyone is not living in reality. I see when they're tearing down the statues, we talked about this, Alexander. It was really weird. All these people are tearing down the statues. I think it was in Bristol, actually, where they were tearing down the statue. And as they were tearing it down and throwing it into the river, these kids were saying, oh, F you. Yeah, we got you. We won. Look at you. Now you're going in the river. They were talking to the statue like it was a real person.
Absolutely.
Like this guy was alive. And I'm sitting here going, Christopher Columbus doesn't give a rat's ass that you're tearing down. I've got news for everybody. Christopher Columbus is dead. He's not living. And even more to the point, whether you like Christopher Columbus or not, all these SJWs and these virtue signalers, you guys couldn't last one day in Christopher Columbus's world. It doesn't mean you have to like the guy, but that guy sailed from Europe to discover new territory that he had no idea where the hell he was going. He was probably at sea for 3-4 months, discovers people that he's never seen before in his life. He does it multiple times, goes through all kinds of wars, all kinds of disease, all kinds of famine, all kinds of sickness. And you guys are sitting here judging him when these guys can't go for 5 minutes without their soy milk latte from Starbucks. We're seeing it in Chaz, guys. These guys can't garden. They have no skills. They're high 24 hours a day. They've created borders. They're upset with Columbus, who's a colonizer, when they've colonized downtown Seattle.
Well, this
they've taken other people's stuff, other people's property, and they've made it their own. They're colonizers. You guys want to be trendsetters? Go to the desert and build a society.
Well, quite. Yeah, no, but of course that's not what this is all about at all. And I mean, they're not about building a society. It's about reordering our existing society. And of course, they're doing this in a very confused and disorganized way. But two things to say. Firstly, I think also one mustn't overlook, and I think it's certainly this is true in Britain, maybe less so in the United States. We've had several weeks of lockdown. A lot of young people got very frustrated. This is a good opportunity for some of them to go out and have a protest, and undoubtedly there was some element of enjoying themselves about this. So I mean, that may be downplaying the significance of it, but there is that element. The other element behind it, though, is, as I said, a very powerful manipulation that is going on behind the scenes. And by the way, I noticed some left-wing people are making the same point. Mike Whitney wrote a very interesting article, and he's definitely on the left, I'd say, making exactly the same point, that some of these protests, bricks don't suddenly appear. They don't appear from nowhere. There aren't scouts looking out for police. There is always an element of organization behind all of this. And people who deny the existence of that organization, you know, are not being realistic. And there is an attempt, undoubtedly, to try and use these issues to achieve ideological objectives, which are to reorder society and to reorder our history. And of course, if you reorder our history, you reorder our society. There are also specific political objectives, which have to do, I think, a lot with the election in November and defeating Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that for me is that I really don't know what their demands are. What kind of society do they actually want to create? I mean, talking to a statue, okay, they're starting off real well there, and then throwing it in the river. Okay, fine. So the problem's resolved? Really? I don't get that. Okay. What is interesting thing to me, for me, is that, okay, they want to create something that is antithetical to the established order. Okay, fine. That's been tried many times. But what is interesting to me is that they're not interested in a conversation. See, this is really just one-sided, okay? And their opponents, quote unquote, these evil people and ideas, apparently they have no agency because you don't want even to address them. No. Now, see, this is what makes it, you know, vacuous to me. I mean, so what do you want us to do? Okay, I'm open to conversation here. They don't want that, okay? No. And because that would make them think about what they want to accomplish. What they want to accomplish is chaos, okay? And we always have to keep in mind, you know, the different levels of this. Of course, the November election is playing a role in this. That's why the media is playing along, okay? Because all of the other attempts to trip Trump up have failed, though I think he's in the middle of his biggest crisis. And one that he didn't create is one that is the pandemic and how he's going to deal with it, the economic situation, which of course, you know, the blue states want to stay as close as long as possible to make a political point, which is actually shameless. I mean, what about their constituents? So, I mean, this is a lot of things colliding at the same time, and it's quite intentional. But what they want to achieve is still a mystery to me. So you want to burn it down, then what? Okay. I mean, if you look at all the other revolutions and uprisings, they had goals, okay? Get rid of the czar, okay? Get rid of the king, all right? Have a more democratic society, have a franchise. I mean, these are, I mean, read Marx. I mean, Marx and Engels are very clear about what they wanted to achieve, right? And it's very lucid and well thought out. You can agree or disagree with it, okay? But this, I don't know. And this, the weakness of the authorities, you know, they bend very, very easily, okay? And I find that very problematic because, like I said in the very beginning, the Overton window has been really expanded, and it shows that they have their doubts about their legitimacy. The very foundation of the modern nation state is that the state has a legitimate use of violence, okay? I know that's kind of a sad number one, but it is, okay? And it is the police, okay? Now, once you degrade that, or have it step back, you're creating an opening for these people, as I just said a second ago, is that they don't really have any real clear agenda. And that's, at the end of the day, that equals chaos.
But the oligarchs want to weaken the state because, of course, from their point of view, the very last thing they want is a strong state, which is an accountable state, a democratic state, which might put restraints on what they do. So if you're looking at it from their point of view, they don't want a strong police force. They don't want strong regulatory bodies. They don't want governments that feel themselves strong and legitimate, because those kind of governments, accountable to voters.
I got to push back a little bit. They want a police and security state that protects their interests.
Absolutely.
That's it.
But they do want that. But as I said, they don't want it so strong Of course, for their point of view, I mean, this is always the way, because it's always the way with elites that sort of destroy themselves in the end. It's like the French aristocrats who wouldn't pay taxes. And so the result was that in France, in the 18th century, the French state collapsed, and it brought down the aristocrats with them. But the oligarchs don't want a situation where they themselves are held to any kind of account. And they're not particularly bothered if police withdraw from certain neighborhoods in places like Seattle. It doesn't concern them. It doesn't affect them at all.
But if Chaz tries to annex Silicon Valley, then they are.
Well, then they are. Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously, but I mean, in a way, it's the Ukrainianization of the United States. That's almost their ideal, because obviously Ukraine does have a police force, it doesn't have an army, but it doesn't really function in the way that we see armies and police working in most societies. There's a great deal of crime goes on in Ukraine. Police are not about controlling that. They're not about checking the abuses of what oligarchs do. Oligarchs are able to control whatever is left of the state in order to operate it in their own interest, so that they can continue to plunder society to their benefit. And at the same time, as in Ukraine, you see certain ideological symbols and cliches talked about, the revolution of dignity, which is what they talk about in the Ukraine. And of course, you see some of the same sort of slogans being used now in the United States. So as I said, they don't want strong states. They want weak states. They want states that won't check them. At the same time, obviously, they don't want no state at all, because they want to be protected up to a certain point. So, but for the rest of us, what they are proposing is frankly extremely dangerous and very disastrous.
Well, you won't have a functioning economy, and that's when the cold shower hits everybody. Okay?
Absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
Again, I want to go back to, this is a process. It's a politics of movement. Okay.
Yes.
And it's really exciting for young people. I mean, think of the countless number of young people that have these useless degrees from university. Now they get to be able to put it to use. Okay. I mean, essentially, what's really interesting, to kind of a derivative on those that control the powers, the economic power structures of the United States. I mean, this is a real boon for them and for these kids with these useless undergraduate degrees. Now, everywhere, every state institution, every private institution and company is going to have a diversity director. They're going to have speech control director. I mean, this is just another tax on the working class, okay?
Yes.
You make them pay for this mind control. And you have this cadre of young people with these useless degrees. They're going to get jobs. At least some of them are going to get some job. I mean, Bezos will do it as long as you don't bring unions to my company. He'll be for diversity all over the place. Diversity will be his middle name, but don't touch my serfs.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, organized labor is not something he wants at all. that's not what he's about in any way. I mean, that's
communist.
Exactly.
BLM is going to make a lot of money. They've already made a lot of
Absolutely.
money. They're the real deal now. They're a big time NGO.
Yeah.
Big time NGO.
Absolutely.
They're worth tens, maybe hundreds of millions now. Think about that. In 1 year's time, they've gone from nothing to becoming a major player.
I have a question. Alexander, what was it? You said 59% of people have a positive opinion of Black Lives Matter.
Yes, I know. Without I think having much understanding of what it means. It's the same proportion who think they shouldn't be demonstrating. So it gives you an idea of what.
What does it mean to have an appreciation? I still don't understand what it means.
Well, I don't understand what it means.
Like or have an appreciation of Black Lives Matter.
That
means.
There is, and I think you've got to understand this from the way in this whole story in the United States is being reported here. Most British people see the United States. They don't understand what a very decentralized and federal country it is. They see a police force which, from their understanding of it, is monolithically hostile to Black people and kills Black people. This is very much the way it's represented here, it is, what was that film, the Heat of the Night or whatever it is from the 60s? Most people's perception in Britain is still very much based on that kind of concept of what law enforcement in the United States is all about. So they're against it. The Black Lives Matter tells them this is what's going on, and they're against it.
I have a kind of maybe a very simple question. What percentage of Britons know that the American electorate elected a black man twice to the presidency?
Oh, they do know that. They do know that. But of course, people, as you know very well, Peter, can hold many different contradictory ideas at the same time. I mean, the other thing I really want to emphasize this, and this may surprise many of our American viewers, most people in Britain do not know where Minneapolis is. Most people in Britain had not heard of Minneapolis until
most Americans don't either.
I know. But the fact that Minneapolis is a left-wing, liberal, Democrat-controlled city, and that the police force there it's answerable to a liberal, left-wing, Democrat-controlled government, which has been in existence for, I think, about 50 years, is again something that most British people are not aware of at all. So, yeah.
I mean, that's such a really good point, because there's the media, the liberal media in the United States, they don't want to unpack the history of the Democratic Party when it comes to race relations in the United States. Okay, it's really quite odious. Okay, the Russell Building, the Russell Senate Building. That's where the Senate staff sits and everything like that. He was a Southern racist. Okay, are they going to rename that? They want to rename these bases. Yes. Okay, fine. But then they're going to have to change the name of just about everything in Washington D.C. Okay, is that what they want to do? Okay,
well,
and then
who's behind that push?
How does it change anything?
Who's behind that bill? Who's the senator behind that bill? Elizabeth Warren. A woman that pretended for 30, 40, 50 years that she was Native American.
Well, quite.
And she's behind this bill to rename all the bases and all this stuff. Is Elizabeth Warren.
No.
It's
absolutely.
It's wacko. It's crazy.
Yes.
It's absolute. But these people, they have no sense of self.
No.
They know what they're doing, but they know that they're manipulating other people and they're going to keep their power. So Elizabeth Warren knows what she's doing. She's known what she's been doing for the better part of 50, 60 years. So she knows what she's doing, when she's going to rename these bases, and she's playing to her base. But it's crazy to think that Elizabeth Warren now all of a sudden is sensitive towards other races.
Yeah, but the thing that's really quite interesting here is we juxtapose the civil rights movement. It was white liberals, and actually a lot of Jews from the North were heavily involved in the civil rights movement, because
Bernie Sanders,
very, very much in the same vein of the abolitionist tendencies that Lincoln had. Okay, just taken to another and more important level. But now it's white liberals that are using the race card to divide people, not to unite people. And this is, again, it's always kind of, there's this larger societal systemic issue that's in play, which goes from the civil rights movement to the gay rights movement, environmentalists. I mean, it has this evolution here, but then there's always the immediate political political demand to get Trump out of the White House. This is why it's all colliding at the same time.
Yes.
If we didn't have this president, the same tendencies would be there. They just wouldn't be so intense as we see right now. Okay, and of course we had the lockdown. People are very tired. They're exhausted. Some people are not making their rent, and it also allows for people to say, and I think quite correctly, but they're drawing the wrong conclusion. The system doesn't work for me. And then you have Antifa, Black Lives Matter. They come in and they give falsely, I believe, think they have the answer. No, it isn't. The answer is that the politicians in Washington, including the president, help the wrong people. And you feel this sense of, what about me? Okay. And then we have George Floyd, and we have all of this, and it really is just something that is crashing into each other. And of course, it's giving an opening to people that have multiple levels of a political agenda. That's why it makes it all seem so very chaotic.
Yes.
You know, a lot of people, and we'll get to the super chats right now. Just have one thought. A lot of people don't really even know that Black Lives Matter is an organization. A lot of people, you know, that's the interesting part. That's their marketing trick. They use the words, they use the slogan, and people just think, you know, it sounds good. Well, Black Lives Matter. Of course they do.
Yes.
And that's the trick of it. That's the magic trick. A lot of people don't realize this is a well-funded now, well-organized organization, as is Antifa. They play this trick on us all the time.
Yes.
Antifa's not organized. Antifa's not an organization. No, it's just a bunch of people, you know, protesting against anti-fascism. What did Don Lemon say? It's in the name. Anti-fascist. It's in the name, so they must be against fascism. It's in the name.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. They say it, so there you go. They're playing marketing tricks on us. But at the end of the day, these organizations, these groups are organizations. They have leaders. You can go onto the web and look it up. You can find the people that are behind BLM. You can do your investigation on Antifa. Project Veritas did an investigation. Even once invaded them 2-3 years ago, their organization, and got into it with them. These are well-organized people, and they're heavily funded, and they're funded by people like Soros, and even Steyer, Tom Steyer, who was a Democrat candidate, is funding these guys, not to mention all the celebrities and the Oprah Winfreys and the actors and all the big corporations now, from Nike to Pepsi, you name it. Now they're funding them as well. So I mean,
it's like Planned Parenthood, the same kind of linguistic trick. You know, Planned Parenthood is an abortion industry. Okay, it's not planning families.
Humanitarian wars. Remember Samantha Power? Humanitarian war, everybody. Humanitarian wars.
Well,
we're going to bomb the crap out of everybody, but it's a humanitarian bombing. Absolutely. Barack Obama would wake up in the morning and have his breakfast and then sign a sheet that would drone 15 families every day. But, you know, it's Barack Obama. You know, he's a cool guy. He's a cool guy. He laughs about it.
We tortured some folks.
Yeah, we tortured some folks, everybody. They're all screwing with our heads. The problem is that all these people right now that are protesting and going crazy, they don't have the emotional quotient. They don't have the emotional intelligence to understand this, because they're not living in a real world. They're living in a fantasy land. I remember, Alexander, you said Ukraine, the people in Ukraine, the real protesters were sitting there protesting to get into the European Union. I remember I was sitting in Greece scratching my head going, why in God's name are you guys willing to tear apart your country in order to get into this crap hole called the EU? Because you guys think you're going to be making 5,000 euros a day and driving BMWs? You really think that? You really think getting into the European Union is going to give you a salary and a German automobile?
Wasn't it the Dutch embassy that made that propaganda film, What Your Life Would Be Like? Yeah,
absolutely.
Is that what you think? And it's the same thing going to what's happening right now. All these people think they're going to build this year zero utopia, and now they're planting gardens, and they're having, you know, what is the mayor saying in Seattle? It's the summer of love now. It's the new summer of love.
It's a block party.
Meanwhile, they got a warlord, they got borders. They've got calls for, there's all kinds of violence and rape going on a daily basis. The police can't get in to help.
But see, Alex, the thing is, okay, for me, you want to have a glorified block party? Okay, that's your business here. But what they're doing is they're occupying space where there was no permission of the people that actually live in
colonizers.
Colonizers. Okay. Right. And the thing is that, again, you want to have a block party, a summer of love and all that, but the authorities took an oath to protect citizens of their community. They have abrogated that responsibility, and it sets a very dangerous precedent. In a couple of hours, I'm going to be making a program exactly on that issue. It's fine. You want to protest? Fine. You want to have a block party? That's fine. But you can't extort people. You can't stop emergency services. And then you have the city government giving them latrines, okay, to keep it going. I mean, for me, you know, this thing will fizzle out. Either they have to expand or it will fizzle. Okay.
Yes.
Because they can't sustain themselves. Okay. But what really annoys me is that the state is allowing it to happen. That's the real danger in all of this.
Well,
not these kind of, self-made revolutionaries in downtown Seattle, because that's not the problem for me. The problem is the abdication of responsibility on the side of the authorities.
This is exactly also what happened in Ukraine, by the way. I mean, the reason the situation in Ukraine got completely out of control is because the Ukrainian state, already weak, already poorly led, eventually abdicated control. It just refused to carry out its proper function, the essential function of any state, which is to maintain order. It lost control of the streets and the squares, and it allowed public buildings to be occupied, and it wasn't prepared to clear them, even though it had the resources to do so. And now I don't think that's going to happen in the United States, because I still believe that despite all the things that have gone wrong, the constitutional and legal system there is still much too strong to allow that to happen. But Ukraine should serve as a warning. And, it can go wrong.
All right. Very well said. Let's get to some super chats, guys. Wrap it up. We don't have that many, about like good 10 super chats. Let's get to them. From Valley S, a $20 super chat. Thank you, Valley S, for that super chat. From Gender Neutral, $1.99 super chat. Useful idiots are being used by globalists.
Yes.
Very, very well said.
Very well. Put
said.
it very prithily, but it's exactly right.
From Toilet Sauce, 2 super chats that are related, actually. I wanted to write a comment about the origin of the word slave, but YouTube does not let me do it. Interesting, the word slave was not why it was blocked. So that's a super chat. I don't know where the word slave.
Well, I've heard many different explanations. I mean, one of them, which I don't know whether it's true or not, is that it comes from the late Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, which is that the Byzantines, the early Byzantines, the late Romans, took an awful lot of people from Eastern and Central Europe who were called sclavi, and that was what as slaves, and that they became slaves. Now, sclavi are not the same as Slavs, by the way. Those two words are completely different and should not be confused with each other, because that is a myth that I've often seen in many places. But the ancient Greek word for a slave, for everyone's information, is doulos, which is quite different.
Yeah, it's different. But they also say sklavos. So yeah.
Sklavos, yeah.
Mechanesia Shan ZAR 100. Peter, I think wokeism is a result of premature puberty. There's not much left to bloom after an insult like that.
Well, I'm not sure if that's the case, but I mean, I think that there's a growing sense, particularly among young people. I mean, if you look at what it's a generation Z and a lot of millennials, they have no place in society. They get an education they don't need, and they go into debt. They have the economy, the structure of the economy is changing so quickly.
Yes.
That they don't have a place for themselves. And so this kind of revolutionary fervor fills a vacuum, because the culture, the popular culture, is so vacuous and empty, and it is so it has no moral compass to it, and this gives meaning to a lot of people's lives, I suppose. And it's because of the Hollywoodization, the universities that just don't teach anybody anything anymore. And this is a politics of movement, and they feel and they witness doing things. I mean, I was just watching on the RT website. I don't know. I think it was in the United States, where a statue was toppled, and they're all yelling and screaming and taking pictures, and the statue fell on someone and put the guy in a coma. I mean, good job, guys. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it just comes from a culture that has been turned into a wasteland, an economy that doesn't work for working people.
No.
You feel. I mean, Trump and Sanders, they're just precursors to what's going to come. Okay. because
Yes.
the future is populism. Okay,
Yes.
which side, I don't know, but I mean, this is we talked previously about a pre-revolutionary moment, and I reflected upon many things that Alexander Mercouris had to say. I mean, I don't think anything, the toppling of the government is going to happen anytime soon.
No.
But it's kind of very much like the late Roman Empire, where the empire it keeps loosening up and drawing back until there was nothing left, and that took a long time. Okay,
Absolutely.
With our technology, it will speed it up. But there is a societal and institutional decay. I mean, we just had the most powerful institutions of the intelligence community try to take out an elected president. I mean, that's how shaky these foundations are right now.
Yes.
All right. From Gender Neutral, it's a cult. Whiteness is the original sin, but there is no forgiveness, even with apologies, kneeling, kissing boots, reparations.
Well, I have to say, I agree with that, by the way. And I also say that the whole business of kneeling and kissing and washing, I mean, I find that very disturbing and frankly deeply shocking. And I find that even worse in some ways than the toppling of the statues. I mean, it's so lacking in any sense of human dignity. And Alex made a point recently in a video that for somebody, especially somebody like myself, who's born in and brought up in a Greek Orthodox tradition, this whole business of washing feet clearly refers back to events in the Bible in a very, very disturbing and sacrilegious way. At least so it seems to me. And I'm not any sort of religious fanatic or anything of that kind. But I found it deeply, deeply distressing to see. Actually.
Well, I mean, but don't you think? But that just reinforces what I'm saying is that they're going through motions. Okay,
yes.
There's no meaning to it.
No.
Okay, except for intimidating people, shaming people. I mean, Jesus cleaned the feet of the apostles, not to embarrass them or to shame them, not at all. Okay, so this is a misappropriation of that act. Okay, and again, it's a virtue signaling exercise. Okay, I found it really quite disturbing too. That was really painful to read that.
Absolutely. I mean, I found it hugely
blasphemous.
It's blasphemous. Absolutely.
Blasphemous, yeah.
Yes.
And God isn't going to take too kindly to it either. But anyway, Peter Jackson, BGN 10, how similar is what we are seeing to Mao's Cultural Revolution?
Yeah,
the energized woke students as the Red Guard, the attempt to destroy the four olds, the brainwashing and struggle sessions.
I think there's a great deal of similarity to what happened in the Cultural Revolution. Of course, the Cultural Revolution was a much more violent affair, and it was centrally directed from, Mao's headquarters. But a lot of the scenes that we're seeing in universities and in the streets have great resemblances, no question about this. I don't think we will get to that point. I think there are still forces of restraint within Western societies. But I mean, certainly, if you want to see what happened in China in the 60s and look at what you see in the West today, in the United States especially, the similarities are extremely jarring, at least to me. By the way, I remember the Cultural Revolution. I mean, I was a child at the time, but I can remember the Red Guards. They were still active in the early 70s, a fact which people tend to forget, but there was
Cambodia.
absolutely. And I can remember, the struggle sessions in which people were made to humiliate themselves and engage in self-criticism, the violence, the attacking of monuments and things of that kind. The one thing I would say was that the paradox of all of that was that Mao Zedong himself was, of course, steeped in Chinese culture. He knew Chinese history and Chinese poetry and all that incredibly well, but he had specific political objectives, and he was using these forces in a very, very dangerous and frightening way. And I think the people who are doing this in the United States have some of the same objectives, so they lack Mao's power, and they also lack, dare I say, his understanding of what he was doing, because Mao did understand what he was doing.
Yeah, but many of the people that are promoting this type of behavior and thought process in the United States don't suffer the consequences.
No, of course not.
At all.
No,
That's what another disgusting element of all of it is. That, you know, it's kabuki theater for them.
Yes, yes.
From Meganesia Shan, it's basically irrelevant on your views of current Israeli policy, but the kibbutz is one solution. Kibbutzniks, who are quite different to the municipal soul, can be consultants to the world.
Well, can I just say, a kibbutz is a completely different thing from what Chaz is. I mean, Chaz is not something that is created from the bottom up as a kibbutz is. This is something which, as I said, as Alex described it, I think Peter described it, it's just taking over a neighborhood, setting yourself up there and being supported by the local government. I mean, this is so completely different
because they're
a really self-sustaining.
It's not because they think it's a good idea. They think they're afraid of it. Okay?
I know they are. Yeah. Yes. Right. Yes.
From Peter Jackson, how would you define George Soros's political position? Does his desire to remove all structures, borders, etc., make him as a fair liberal?
No, I don't think he's any kind of liberal. I mean, one of the great problems with liberalism, or the word liberal, is of course it's become something completely different from what it was in, say, the early 20th century. I mean, early 20th century liberalism or 19th century liberalism and today's liberalism are completely different. And perhaps if you understand what modern liberalism is or what it's become, you can use that term to describe it. But ultimately, I mean, I'm going to say it straightforwardly, I think it's a very, very authoritarian, totalitarian, deeply corrupt system, which is become incredibly dangerous. And those who try and say that these manifestations that we're seeing now are somehow distinct from liberalism, I think that if we're talking about the liberalism that we see now, they are one and the same. The one grows out of the other.
All right. Let's get to the final super chats here. Perth Sebastian, 10-year super chat. Discrimination has always existed in between the privileged and the rest. When is the narrative going to move towards debt and wealth inequality? The basis of today's privilege.
I completely agree with that. I mean, the whole point about all of this is to get us away from talking about these things. So as I say, you talk about, as I said, Stonewall Jackson, whether you pull down his statue, you don't talk about these issues, which are far more pressing and far more relevant to the actual lives which people live. But, you know, that's the last thing these people want to talk about.
Right, from
the bizarre thing here is that the United States apparently is so deeply corrupt with racism that there are still hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people of color want to go to the United States every single year. Why do people of color want to go to a racist country? No one's ever been able to explain that. It's just bizarre.
It is bizarre. From Gender Neutral 199 Super Chat, BLM name is like the EU titles. Very well said there. From Momo 199, thank you, Duran team. Love from Hong Kong. Thank you very much. From Toilet Sauce, if you elect clowns, you should expect a circus.
Very good.
And the final two super chats from Brando Commando. Is this growing problem for Trump's reelection? Any updated predictions on how 2020 might go? Sorry if you already answered this. I just woke up. So that's the first one from Brando Commando. Predictions on
predictions. I still think this is going to play in the end into Trump's hands. I'm sorry, my dog is getting rather excited, but I cannot think that most Americans looking at all of these events are happy, and I think that most of them are going to finally mobilize behind the person who stands for authority, who is the president, who happens to be Donald Trump. One point which I would make is that it has done two things. Firstly, it has mobilized the Black American electorate, which had frayed somewhat in 2016. It's consolidated them behind Joe Biden. And the second thing it's done is it's also energized a lot of young people in the United States who might previously have supported Bernie Sanders and who might have decided not to vote, but it's going to make them more likely again to vote for Joe Biden. If I'm right about that, if you're going to get these two electoral blocks voting for Joe Biden in large numbers, it'll be a closer election than it might have been. But think about the implications again. Voting for Joe Biden, again, it's voting for the oligarchy. It is, in effect, a reactionary movement. Over to you.
I think that, the summer is going to be a long and hot one. So I'm going to kind of reserve my prediction. I just keep focusing on the economy. That's what it's what kind of recovery there's going to be. I think is going to play a major role in this too. But I have to echo the sentiment of Alexander Makiris. I mean, if we look historically, law and order usually prevails. People are sick and tired of this. Okay, we had that recent shooting. I guess it was yesterday, in Atlanta, and that's just good. That's going to really fuel the anger because from what I could see, I watched part of the video. I mean, the guy was intoxicated. He wasn't, drunk out of his mind, but he was intoxicated.
Yes.
And he had a taser, and the police had a gun.
Yeah.
All right.
The pictures don't lie.
No.
From Brando Commando, the final super chat. It's a good one. Is the U.S. at the same point as the Julio-Claudius dynasty of the Roman Empire, where Trump is Nero and is awaiting his ignominious downfall as Rome burns? If not, what moment in history is most reminiscent? So what moment in history is most reminiscent of today?
I would say that after Nero fell, there was a civil war, but ultimately what happened was you got Vespasian who comes along and he reestablishes the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire actually has its best days afterwards. So there are some similarities, I suppose, but I don't think Trump is really like Nero. And I don't think the situation is exactly the same. I come back to what I said. I think if you really want to understand the dynamics of this, look at Ukraine. You don't have to go very far back. Ukraine, it seems to me, is the best model. The other place where I think there are some resemblances is pre-revolutionary France, where you have an elite which is continuously undermining the authority figure who is the king, which is supporting all kinds of ideological and political ideas which are circulating in France, which are undermining the basis of the French monarchy. They don't want to see a revolution, but that is in the end what they get. And what they see also is a total collapse of the society that they themselves were the great beneficiaries of. So I think there's some similarities to pre-revolutionary France. I think there's more similarities to modern Ukraine, but the United States is a different country, and you should never look too much to history for an exact parallel. You can learn from history, but it doesn't repeat itself exactly.
Well, I will take one in the middle then. I think this is very much like Weimar Germany. I think that's because what you do is you have institutions that are failing, and you have centers of power that are unwilling to save the republic. Okay, and I think there's this kind of exhaustion in many different elements of society. So Weimar, it's kind of like a cancer that keeps growing until finally the organism itself collapses. And I think there's some similarity there.
All right, guys, that's it. Well, one more super chat just came in. The reason why people of color come to the U.S. is because of the power of the dollar and pound, and the euro are strong, and the perception of the white picket fence and the 2-car garages.
Absolutely.
Well, okay, fine, but I mean, they want to go to a place where they can live better. Okay, I mean, I don't think they want to go and feel experience racial inequality. The fact of the matter is that a lot of people that go to the United States, they already have relatives there, and they say it's pretty good. Come along, okay. And so I mean, this whole thing about the country is at its core a racist or racist society is just absolutely absurd on its face. I mean, how many police officers are Black? How many Hispanics are Black? Hispanics that are police officers? I mean, you can go on and on. there's no very simple way of looking at this, but this purported ideology seems to have all the solutions. And anytime someone says they have an ideology that solves all their problems, be careful of them, stay away from them, run away from them.
Absolutely true.
All right, guys. Any final thoughts? Spartan Warrior Queen, thank you very much for the moderation. Great job as always. We really appreciate it. Peter.
I hope we can do this again on Friday.
All right. Alexander.
Well, we're going to see. There's a lot going on in Britain, by the way, at the moment. We got a simmering, I think, political crisis because the government is beginning to look very adrift, and I gather a lot of people within the Conservative Party feel again that the government has failed to get a proper grip of the situation, both in terms of the handling of the pandemic and in terms of its handling of the protests. And the Churchill statue issue apparently has crystallized a lot of that feeling. So we're going to see what's going to happen in Britain. But of course, the focus always remains the United States. And this has been such an unpredictable year. So many things have happened. We started with an impeachment. We then had a pandemic. Now we've got these protests. One wonders really what's coming next.
Yeah. All right. Stay focused on Brexit, everyone in the UK. Stay focused on
indeed.
Brexit. All right.
Okay.
All right, guys. Good live stream. Thank you to everyone who joined us in the chat. Thank you for your super chats. Thank you, Spartan Warrior Queen, for the moderation. Thank you to everyone for everything that you do. Take care. Have a good Monday. Have a good week. And we'll see you guys. We'll catch you guys on Friday, most likely. Take care, everybody.